Have you ever felt that crushing moment when all your years of loyalty, all your late nights, sacrifices, and quiet dedication are suddenly dismissed with one cold sentence? This is the story of Sarah, an employee who gave 17 years of her life to a company, only to be told by a new face that she was replaceable. Sarah wasn't just another worker. She was the invisible spine of the corporation. She had joined the company fresh out of college, full of optimism and raw determination. Back then, she was the one fetching files, drafting minutes of meetings, answering calls, and learning every system inside out. She wasn't glamorous, she wasn't loud, but she was steady. Over the years, Sarah had become the problem solver, the silent peacekeeper. Whenever conflict broke out in a team, it was Sarah who mediated. Whenever a new hire was confused, Sarah guided them. Whenever the executives needed quick data, Sarah was the one they trusted. She had built not only a career, but a reputation. The woman who never failed. Her desk reflected her life. A bonsai plant she lovingly trimmed every week. 2 photos of her children, pinned neatly against the monitor. Her son's cheeky grin, her daughter's first school picture. And inside the drawer, a small yellow stress ball that had absorbed years of her silent frustrations. She balanced her world between motherhood, work, and the endless grind of corporate life. The company itself was a glass and steel giant with polished lobbies, wide corridors, and glowing screens that displayed performance charts like scoreboards. Sales buzzed with energy, production with noise, but HR, Sarah's domain, had acquired a rhythm. It was the pulse of the company, invisible yet vital. She managed policies, contracts, conflicts, all the things that didn't make headlines, but kept the engine running. Then came the day that would change everything. The CEO announced in a grand town hall, "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new era. We are bringing on board a visionary, someone who has transformed companies, driven innovation, and delivered results. Please welcome David Langley, our new vice president." The glass doors swung open. In walked David, the very picture of corporate charisma. A tailored navy blue suit, Italian shoes that clicked with authority, a green smoothie in hand, and a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than Sarah's yearly salary. His smile was sharp, his stride confident. The applause thundered, though some employees exchanged wary glances. Sarah's heart sank, not because of jealousy, but because she recognized the type. She had seen men like him before, the turnaround specialists. They swoop in with shiny promises, shake things up, make ruthless cuts, and then disappear with fat bonuses, leaving behind chaos for others to clean up. David's first meeting confirmed her fears. He scanned the HR reports, waved them aside, and said, "This department is too legacy-heavy, too much tradition, not enough data-driven innovation. We need transformation, fast." His words were surgical, cold, dismissive. The team Sarah had built for 17 years, reduced to a liability in one sentence. She wanted to protest, to explain the complexities HR handled daily, but she knew better. In corporate politics, the loudest voice wasn't always the smartest. Sometimes survival meant silence. Days later, Sarah received a message. "VP wants to see you. 3 p.m. She walked into his office, sleek, minimalistic, a faint smell of expensive cologne lingering. David leaned back in his leather chair, studying the photos on her file. He looked at her, then at the framed picture of her children she carried in a folder, then at her notes. "So Sarah," he said slowly, almost patronizingly, "you've been here, what, 17 years?" "Yes," she replied calmly, masking the nervousness in her chest. "Since before the Monroe acquisition," he smirked, tapping his pen on the desk. "Impressive, but here's the thing. Sometimes too much experience hides freshness. Companies need new blood. People who think differently, act differently. Sarah didn't flinch. She had heard speeches like this before. But then came the knife. As he stood, heading toward the door, he turned and delivered the sentence that would burn itself into her memory. Remember, Sarah, you are replaceable. Those words hit like glass shattering inside her chest. Replaceable? After 17 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and unseen labor. Replaceable? After every late night, every crisis managed, every smile forced through exhaustion. She smiled faintly, not out of agreement, but as armor. She refused to let him see her crack. But inside, a fire ignited. That evening, back at her desk, she opened her drawer and pulled out a fresh folder. On the cover, she wrote, David L. Transition File. Inside, she placed her first note. Watch. Record. Wait. 3 words. Her strategy. From that day, Sarah transformed. Outwardly, she was the same calm, polite HR manager. She nodded in meetings, smiled in corridors, and did her job with her usual efficiency. But privately, she became an archivist of David's world. Every directive, every email, every policy draft, she recorded meticulously. Every inconsistency, every sign of recklessness, she saved. She understood something most people missed. Arrogance is predictable. A man who believes he is untouchable will always leave fingerprints on his mistakes. Her job wasn't to fight him openly. Not yet. Her job was to quietly prepare the case, piece by piece, until the day came when David's own arrogance would hand her the weapon. That night, as she closed the office and walked past the tall glass walls reflecting the city lights, Sarah whispered to herself, You think I'm replaceable, David. But one day, you'll find out you are accountable. The war had begun. Silent, patient, invisible. David Langley wasted no time. Within 2 weeks of his arrival, the office atmosphere shifted from routine hum to suffocating tension. His slogans about innovation and transformation quickly turned into spreadsheets filled with red marks, targets, and a chilling phrase that echoed in every department, cost-cutting. The layoffs had left scars across the company. Empty cubicles stood like tombstones of once loyal employees, their family photos and coffee mugs gone overnight. The break room, once noisy with laughter and gossip, was now eerily quiet. Fear was the new dress code, worn by everyone, every day. But Sarah wasn't just afraid anymore. She was angry, and her anger had sharpened into resolve. Every morning, as she watered her tiny bonsai plant, she reminded herself, slow, steady, patient. Bonsais didn't grow overnight. They thrived on discipline and time. That was her model now. The discovery one evening, buried in the HR server's archives, Sarah stumbled upon the folder that changed everything. Restructure plan, draft, April 14th. She clicked it open and froze. The contents were chillingly familiar. Page after page mirrored the very plan David was parading as his own. Identical cost projections, identical staffing cuts, even identical phrasing in the executive summary. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a flash drive. She copied the file, then cross-checked the metadata. Created April 14th, last year. Owner, Sarah Johnson. HR Director's office at the time. Her eyes narrowed. So this is his masterpiece? My draft. Scrolling further, she found the email she had sent last year. Proposed HR restructuring plan for efficiency. It had gone to the then CEO and several board members. Timestamped and archived. David hadn't created anything new. He had stolen an old draft and repackaged it as his own vision. And then, like lightning in her brain, the memory of Clause 9b surfaced. The contract loophole. David loved bragging about his contract. In meetings, he'd casually mention, Clause 9b ensures fairness. If I deliver a new restructuring plan approved by the board, I earned my $5 million performance bonus. Sarah opened the PDF of his contract. She'd seen it before, but hadn't paid attention. Now, every word mattered. The clause was clear. A bonus of $5 million shall be awarded to the Vice President if a new restructuring plan, created and implemented under their leadership within Q2, is approved by the board. One word gleamed like a diamond in the dark. New. David's plan wasn't new. It was recycled. A legal technicality, yes, but a fatal one. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a slow smile forming. He thinks I'm replaceable, but his greed just made him vulnerable. Building allies. Sarah knew evidence was powerful, but allies were essential. One person's word could be dismissed. A coalition could not. She began carefully. First, Michael, the company's legal officer, and her old college friend. Over coffee, she slid a folder across the table. He flipped through the documents, his lawyer's eyes scanning quickly. Then he looked up, eyebrows raised. Sarah, this isn't just strong. This is bulletproof. If you reveal this at the right moment, he's finished. Sarah nodded. But timing is everything. If I go too early, he'll spin it. Too late, he'll cash the bonus. I need him to trap himself on record. Michael smiled grimly. Then make sure he brags about originality again. With his ego. That won't be hard. Next, Janet, a senior board member and Sarah's former mentor. She invited Janet for lunch, pretending it was casual. When the conversation turned to company culture, Sarah carefully dropped hints. Janet, don't you think we've lost something? Loyalty? Trust? Respect? Janet sighed. David's methods. They trouble me, but he dazzles the others with numbers. Why? Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice. Because sometimes numbers hide the truth. And soon, I'll show you. Janet's eyes sharpened. You have something, don't you? Sarah didn't confirm, but she didn't deny either. She just said, wait until the next board meeting. The trap. David's arrogance was his weakness, and Sarah knew how to use it. Every time he mocked her in meetings. Sarah, you're stuck in old ways. She stayed silent, jotting notes in her leather-bound diary. Every time he boasted in the cafeteria. This is my vision. No one else could have done it. She let him talk, witnesses all around. Every time he preened before executives. The originality of my plan speaks for itself. She smiled faintly, knowing those very words would be his undoing. Her diary grew thick with dates, quotes, and signatures of witnesses. She labeled the final section, Operation Mirror. Why mirror? Because Sarah didn't plan to destroy David herself. She would hold up the mirror and let him destroy himself. Cracks in the facade. Meanwhile, small cracks appeared in David's perfect image. Vendors complained about unpaid invoices. David had diverted budgets to make cost charts look better. Fired employees filed lawsuits for wrongful termination. Morale plummeted so low that productivity reports dropped by 18%. But David spun every issue with slick words. To the board, he painted layoffs as strategic realignment. To the press, he leaked stories about bold new leadership. To staff, he said, be patient. Greatness requires sacrifice. Still, whispers began spreading. Is he really a visionary or just a fraud? Sarah fanned those whispers subtly. Over coffee, she'd say, funny how his plan looks so familiar. In emails, she'd drop questions like, didn't we draft something similar last year? Slowly, doubt took root. Sarah's preparation. In her apartment, Sarah transformed her dining table into a war room. Stacks of printouts. Her original draft. David's version. Board emails. Financial charts. Testimonies. A giant timeline pinned to the wall. April. Last year. Sarah's draft submitted. June. Last year. Plan shelved due to leadership change. March. This year. David's original plan unveiled. Side by side. The similarities were undeniable. Even the same typo on page 7. Stramlined instead of streamlined. Sarah chuckled. He didn't even bother correcting the typo. That arrogance will cost him everything. The calm before the storm. The board meeting was 2 weeks away. David strutted around the office, humming tunes, buying new suits, hanging expensive art in his office. He acted as if the bonus was already wired into his account. Next quarter, he told colleagues, I'll prove I'm the smartest investment this company ever made. Sarah, sitting quietly in the corner of meetings, wrote in her diary, the higher the throne, the harder the fall. At night, she rehearsed in her head how it would unfold. David presenting, bragging, claiming originality. Then she'd rise, file in hand, voice calm but sharp, and reveal the truth. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. Sarah had waited months, maybe years for this moment. She had endured being called replaceable. She had watched friends lose jobs, seen loyalty discarded like garbage. Now, she held the truth. And soon, in front of the most powerful people in the company, she would hold up the mirror, and David Langley would see exactly what he was. A fraud. At first, the announcement seemed minor. A weekly newsletter discontinued. Coffee machines replaced with cheaper alternatives. Department budgets trimmed by 10%. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, but told themselves it was temporary. Every company tightened belts sometimes. But then came the first wave. Effective immediately, 20 positions will be eliminated, David declared at an all-staff meeting. His tone clinical, almost cheerful. This will allow us to streamline operations and focus on efficiency. 20 people. Some had been there for years. Others were fresh hires still learning the ropes. All escorted out within 48 hours. Cardboard boxes in hand. Security badges deactivated. The open plan office that once buzzed with chatter now carried the eerie silence of empty desks. Sarah watched it unfold like a slow-motion disaster. She knew layoffs happened in corporate life, but never with this cruelty. No transition planning, no severance beyond bare minimum, no appreciation for years of service, just a cold handshake and a locked email account. The worst part wasn't the firing. It was the way David framed it. These individuals, he said at the next executive meeting, were simply not value-adding. We're better off without the dead weight. Dead weight. The words punched Sarah's chest. She looked around the table. Some executives nodded obediently. Others kept their eyes low. Fear had begun to seep into the culture. Nobody wanted to be the next replaceable. The human cost for Sarah. HR wasn't just policies and paperwork. It was people. She had hired some of those employees herself. Watched them grow. Celebrated their birthdays with cake in the break room. There was Mary from accounts, a single mother who always left at 6 p.m. sharp to pick up her son from daycare. Gone. There was Imran, a young analyst who had moved cities for this job, excited to start his career. Gone. And worst of all, there was Peter, 25 years in the company, loyal to the bone, always first in and last out. He walked out with a box of books and a half-dead plant, muttering, "Guess loyalty doesn't pay." Sarah wanted to scream, but she didn't. Instead, she added 3 more tabs to her. David L., transition file, case 1. Mary, single mother, laid off despite high performance. Case 2, Imran, probation terminated without notice. Case 3, Peter, 25 years service, fired without recognition. She gathered exit interviews, saved copies of performance reviews that contradicted David's dead weight claims, and recorded whispered testimonies from the shell-shocked staff. Every document, every story, ammunition. The second wave. If the first layoffs were a tremor, the second was an earthquake. 6 weeks into David's reign, an internal email leaked. Phase 2 restructuring. 50 more jobs marked for elimination. Entire teams dissolved overnight. The IT help desk was cut in half. Marketing lost senior strategists. Even HR, Sarah's department, wasn't spared. One of her closest colleagues, Julia, was called into David's office. She emerged pale, holding a white envelope. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "He said my role is redundant." Redundant, Sarah. After 10 years. Sarah hugged her, rage boiling inside. Julia wasn't redundant. She was a pillar. But in David's world, people weren't humans. They were numbers on a cost sheet. The corridors turned ghostly. Conversations dropped when footsteps approached. Employees began carrying resumes in secret, whispering about job hunts over hushed lunch breaks. Everyone feared the email subject line that would end their careers. Meeting request, 3 p.m. David thrived in the fear. He walked through the office with a predator's calm, sipping his smoothie, greeting selectively, radiating untouchable arrogance. Sarah's quiet resistance. But Sarah wasn't broken. She was watching, recording, waiting. Every policy memo David issued, she saved. When he ordered IT to delete old staff records to declutter the system, Sarah quietly printed backups. When he bypassed proper procedures to fire probationary staff without notice, she documented the breach of labor law. When he promised executives cost savings that didn't match actual budgets, she preserved the financial discrepancies. Late at night, when the office emptied, Sarah would sit under the sterile glow of her desk lamp, scanning documents into encrypted folders. Her bonsai plant sat quietly by her side, a reminder of patience. Growth was slow, but unstoppable. She began building allies too. Quiet conversations in the break room, gentle nods of solidarity. Some colleagues were too scared to speak, but others, those who had nothing left to lose, whispered their experiences. "Keep everything, Sarah," Peter told her the day he left. "One day, someone will need to see what really happened here." She promised him she would. The breaking point. The final straw came when David announced a grand presentation. He gathered the remaining employees in the auditorium. Lights dimmed. A slideshow on the giant screen behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth as silk. "We've achieved remarkable savings. Streamlining this company is the smartest decision leadership has ever made. And we're not done yet. Next quarter, we're pushing harder." He clicked the slide. Graphs showed rising profits. Profits manufactured by cutting jobs, not by innovation. He smiled proudly. From the back row, Sarah clenched her fists. She looked around at the weary faces of her colleagues. Hollow-eyed, anxious, beaten down. The company wasn't thriving. It was bleeding. But David had dressed the wound as progress. That night, Sarah sat at her desk long after midnight. She opened her file, now thick with evidence. Unfair dismissals, legal violations, contradictory financials, testimonies from employees, copies of deleted data. She placed one final sticky note on the inside cover. Leverage. Her strategy was complete. Now it was only a matter of timing. Sarah had started as a silent observer. Now she was becoming something else. A strategist, a survivor, and perhaps the one person who could bring David down. The war was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who had been silenced, discarded, erased, and deep down, she knew. The higher David climbed on his throne of arrogance, the harder he would fall. The morning of the board meeting felt strangely calm. Sarah dressed with deliberate care. A navy blue blazer, crisp white shirt, pearl earrings. Nothing flashy, nothing timid, just steady. She glanced at her bonsai before leaving her apartment. Its branches had grown, carefully trimmed and guided. Patience, discipline, timing, she reminded herself. Today was the day. Entering the lion's den, the boardroom gleamed with glass walls and polished oak. overlooking the city skyline. At the head of the table sat the board chair, flanked by executives, analysts, and advisors. David Langley entered like a king arriving at his coronation. A bespoke charcoal suit, golden cufflinks, a pocket square folded with military precision. He flashed his perfect smile as photographers snapped pictures outside. "Today, ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice dripping confidence, "we review the boldest restructuring plan in this company's history. My plan." The word "my" hung in the air like perfume. Sarah sat 3 seats down, silent, her leather-bound diary resting on the polished wood. Michael, the legal officer, gave her a small nod. Janet, the board member, tapped her pen. Subtle support. David's performance. David clicked through slides on the giant screen. Graphs soared upward. Red bars turned green. Costs dropped. Profits rose. "Efficiency," he declared, "is the future. This plan is not only original, it is revolutionary." He paused dramatically, letting the word original echo. Then he turned, scanning faces. Other companies dream of such vision, but only here, under my leadership, do we achieve it. The board members nodded, some impressed, some skeptical. David thrived on their attention, leaning on the table, his voice dropping to a persuasive whisper. "This plan," he said, "is my creation. Unique, innovative, unmatched." Sarah wrote the words in her diary. My creation. Unique, unmatched. The question. When David finished, the room erupted in polite applause. The chair cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Langley. A strong presentation. Before we move to approval, are there any questions?" Silence. Then, Janet's calm voice cut through. "Yes, I have a question," she said. "David, you've emphasized originality. Could you confirm again, this plan was created entirely by you?" David straightened, smiling. "Absolutely. Every projection, every detail, every recommendation, conceived and designed under my leadership. This is my intellectual property, my contribution to the company." Sarah's pulse quickened. That was the moment. The noose had tightened. The reveal. She stood slowly, every eye turning toward her. "Mr. Chair, esteemed board members," Sarah began, her voice clear but measured, "I must respectfully challenge that claim." A ripple of surprise swept across the room. David's smile faltered, just for a second. Sarah opened her folder, sliding copies down the table. "What you see before you is a restructuring draft submitted last April. A year ago." Confused murmurs rose. Sarah continued, steady as a surgeon. "This draft was prepared by my office, under the HR division. It includes the same cost projections, the same staffing adjustments, even identical phrasing. In fact," she tapped the page. "On page 7, you'll find the same typo. Stramlined instead of streamlined." The board members flipped pages, eyes widening. "This," Sarah said, "is not a new plan. It is a recycled one. Clause 9B of Mr. Langley's contract specifies that his $5 million bonus applies only to a new restructuring plan. Therefore, his claim and his eligibility are invalid." The confrontation. David's face flushed crimson. He forced a laugh. "This is outrageous. Sarah, are you seriously suggesting I copied an old HR draft? This is slander." Michael, the legal officer, spoke up calmly. "It's not slander if it's supported by timestamps, emails, and metadata, which for the record, we've reviewed." Janet leaned forward. "David, did you or did you not use Sarah's draft as the foundation of your plan?" David's jaw clenched. "Every leader builds on previous work." "Answer the question," the chair interrupted, voice cold. David's eyes darted around, searching for support. None came. Finally he snapped, "Fine! Yes, I used parts of it, but I improved it. That makes it mine." Sarah's voice cut like glass. "Improved? You copied. Even the mistakes. That isn't leadership. That's theft. The collapse. The boardroom atmosphere shifted. Respect drained from faces, replaced by disappointment, even disgust. Janet whispered to the chair. He nodded gravely. Mr. Langley, the chair said, you have misrepresented your work, violated the spirit of your contract, and jeopardized the trust of this board. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending further investigation. David slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this. I'm the reason profits are up. But his voice cracked. Sweat glistened on his forehead. The king's crown had slipped, and everyone could see the frightened man beneath. Security guards entered quietly. David's protests echoed as they escorted him out. His golden cufflinks caught the light one last time before disappearing through the glass doors. Silence and applause. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Janet spoke, voice firm. Sarah, thank you for your courage. It takes integrity to hold a mirror to power. The chair nodded. Indeed, this company needs leaders who value truth over ego. Sarah, we will be relying on your guidance as we move forward. Soft applause filled the room. Not loud, not showy, but real. Sarah sat down, her diary closed at last. She didn't smile, but her eyes shone with quiet triumph. Later, that evening, Sarah walked home through the city streets, the sunset painting the sky in shades of fire. For the first time in months, her steps felt light. Her phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Perfectly executed. Operation Mirror, success. She smiled, slipping the phone into her bag. At home, she watered her bonsai. Its branches, once fragile, now spread confidently. Like the tree, she had grown with patience. And like a skilled gardener, she had trimmed away the rot. David had called her replaceable. But today proved the truth. She wasn't replaceable. She was indispensable. The morning after the boardroom battle, the office felt like a different place. For months, employees had walked in with slumped shoulders, avoiding eye contact, fearing every meeting invite. But that day, the atmosphere carried something unexpected. Relief. Conversations sparked in corners again. Coffee cups clinked with small laughter. It was as if the building itself exhaled, after holding its breath too long. David Langley was gone. His office, once a fortress of arrogance and polished cruelty, stood empty. The glass desk, the designer chair, the shelves of pretentious business books, all stripped bare overnight. The golden nameplate had been removed from the door. All that remained was a faint outline where the letters had been. Picking up the pieces. Sarah walked into her HR department that morning, greeted by colleagues with grateful smiles. Julia, rehired after the board overruled her dismissal, hugged her tightly. You did it, Julia whispered. You saved us. Sarah shook her head gently. No, we saved each other. Everyone who spoke up, everyone who trusted me with their stories. That's what made the difference. But deep down, she knew the truth. If she hadn't documented everything, if she hadn't taken the risk, David would still be sitting on his throne, dismantling lives for his bonus. She sat at her desk, looking at the bonsai plant that she had carried in that morning. Its roots were strong now, its leaves greener than ever, a living symbol that patience and care could outlast cruelty. The company's healing. The board acted quickly. David's suspension turned into permanent termination after a full investigation confirmed Sarah's evidence. His golden parachute contract was nullified. His reputation in the corporate world collapsed overnight. News outlets ran headlines about the CEO who plagiarized his own plan. Meanwhile, the company began to heal. Janet was appointed interim CEO. Her first action was symbolic but powerful. She reinstated fair severance packages for those wrongfully terminated and personally called long-term employees, like Peter, to apologize. Your loyalty was never wasted, she told him. It was betrayed, and we're correcting that. Some employees returned. Others chose not to. their trust too broken, but they left knowing justice had been served. Most importantly, the fear lifted. Meetings no longer carried the weight of execution. The office buzzed with cautious optimism. The belief that maybe, just maybe, integrity could coexist with profit. Sarah's recognition. 2 weeks later, the board called Sarah into the same room where she had confronted David. This time, the atmosphere was warm. No arrogance, no deception. Only respect. The chair spoke first. Sarah, what you did required courage, intelligence, and integrity. Without your evidence, this company would have walked straight into ruin. Morally and legally, you've proven that true leadership isn't about power, but principle. Janet added, we'd like you to take on a new role. Vice President of People and Culture. It's not just a promotion. It's recognition that the soul of this company lies in its people, and you've protected that soul. For a moment, Sarah was speechless. She had spent months documenting every cruelty, every injustice, often doubting if it would ever matter. And now, here it was. Proof that truth, though fragile, could win. She accepted quietly. No grand speeches, no celebration, just a firm nod and the words, "Thank you. I'll do my best." A visit to the past. That weekend, Sarah visited Peter at his small home on the outskirts of the city. He opened the door, surprised. "Sarah, what brings you here?" She smiled and handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was his reinstatement letter, along with a note of personal appreciation. "Peter, this company owes you more than it can repay. If you want to come back, the door is open. If not, know that your fight wasn't in vain." Peter's eyes welled up. "I thought, after all those years, I was just discarded, like nothing." Sarah shook her head. "You were never nothing. You were the reason people believed this place was worth fighting for. And I promise that will never happen again." The fall of David Langley. Meanwhile, David's downfall played out publicly. News outlets dissected the scandal with relish. Former employees shared stories of his cruelty, painting a picture of a man who treated lives like chess pieces. Investors pulled out of his private ventures. Invitations to conferences dried up. One photograph circulated widely. David leaving a courthouse. No bodyguards. No polished smile. Just a man in a wrinkled suit, clutching a briefcase like a lifeline. The once untouchable king was now a cautionary tale. And Sarah, she didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply turned the page, focusing on rebuilding what he had tried to destroy. Planting new roots months passed. Slowly, the company transformed. Layoffs were replaced with retraining programs. Instead of dead weight, employees were treated as assets with potential. Teams once fractured by fear grew stronger, united by a shared memory of surviving the storm. On her first day as vice president, Sarah addressed the company in the auditorium. Her speech was short, but it carried the weight of truth. "We are not just a company. We are people. And as long as I have a voice here, no one will be made to feel disposable again." The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was thunderous, heartfelt. The quiet victory. One evening, Sarah stayed late, reviewing reports. The office was quiet, golden with the last light of sunset. She watered her bonsai, trimming a branch carefully. Michael walked by, smiling, still tending that little tree. Sarah looked at the plant, its roots firm, branches balanced. "It reminds me that growth takes time, and that even when something seems fragile, with care, it can outlast the storm." Michael nodded. "So what's next? You've already won the war." Sarah closed her diary. The same leather-bound book she had used to record every injustice. But now, its pages would be filled with something else. "Not war," she said softly. "Now it's about building. That's the real victory." Epilogue. The legacy years later. Employees would tell the story of the HR officer who took down the tyrant CEO. They would speak of her patience, her evidence, her courage. But Sarah never framed it as revenge. For her, it was justice. And every morning, as she passed the bonsai on her desk, she was reminded, true leadership is not about fear. It's about growth, care, and the quiet strength to do what's right. Even when the whole room is against you, David had built his empire on lies. Sarah built hers on truth. And only one of those empires survived.